Good morning, everyone, once again. Thank you for all of you joining online as well. We're going to dive into Job once again, but let's open with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for this morning. Thank you for the sunshine and your creation and what that reveals about yourself, about your wonder and your majesty, Lord. Just pray that our hearts might be open this morning. Help us to understand what you'd have for us from the book of Job. Help us with a more worship service as well. Just help our hearts to be open. Help us to fellowship and enjoy each other's company today as well. Just give me the words to say. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're going to start with a Tim, and we're going to review to see if any of you remember what we talked about last week. And apparently, this morning, once again, I'm not as good of a PowerPoint creator as what I thought I was, because apparently none of my animations came through. So we're going to have to be creative on our PowerPoint once again. So before I even go to the first screen, because it'll give away all the answers, we're going to have a quiz. So God gave us his first speech back to Job. And what did God reveal to Job in his first speech? What all did he talk about? These should be easy. Tim. How Job doesn't know anything. Like about what? Anything. About what specifically? What about creation? What are some things that God talks about? Order of the universe. Creation of the earth. Dimensions of the earth. Holding back of the waters. Does anybody remember any of the animals that were discussed? The lion? Mountain goat was one of them. The ostrich, the hawk. So in all that, God taught Job 3 lessons. And these are the 3 lessons we talked about at the end of last week. Does anybody remember what those 3 lessons are? Tim kind of alluded to one of them. First one was something about Job. Job was what? Okay, I'll just put them up there because this is getting painful. Job's limitations was the first thing. Could Job do any of that? No, God made it abundantly clear that Job could not do anything that God had said. The other thing, when we talk about like the measuring of the earth and the holding back of the waters, what was God revealing to Job? His order, his goodness. God is not a God of chaos. God is not a God of disorder. God is a God of order. God is a God of goodness, and he was revealing that to Job. But within that, is everything perfect? No, God allowed for some chaos. And what was Job's response? So we talked about this last week too. Job 40 verses 3 through 5. Job did what? What did he do with his mouth? Put his hand over his mouth. He had nothing to say back to God. He clearly admitted that God is right, I am wrong, I'm insignificant. But through all that, we kind of alluded to this last week. Did Job have a complete reversal of heart and want to accept God once again after this first speech and just be friends with God once again? Or is there a little bit of timidness still in Job? I mean, in Job's first reaction, he obviously admits that God is powerful, God is almighty, I mean nothing, but it almost seems like there's a little bit of coldness in Job, and he's not really willing to fully accept God's goodness and graciousness yet. So then we get to God's second speech. So I think what God is trying to do is trying to show Job more and trying to get him to really understand why the suffering occurred. So that's why we got to have a second speech from God. And that's in Job 40 verses 7 and 8. So this is right after Job puts his hand over his mouth. He says, I'm insignificant before you. Then Yahweh answered Job out of the whirlwind, now gird up your loins like a man, I will ask you, and you make me know. What does that sound like? Go back to chapter 38. So this is the start of God's first speech, 38 verse 3, and read that. Gird up your loins like a man, I will ask you, and you make me know. Does it say the exact same thing? So what's God showing Job? Once again, same things he did in the first part. Who's going to be asking the questions? God's going to be asking the questions. Job's going to answer. So he's showing that I'm in charge. I will be asking the questions. It is the exact same phrase, and it even mentions the whirlwind again, which is significant in a few verses. Then we get to verse 8. Verse 8's a little different than what we had in chapter 38. Will you really annul my judgment? Will you condemn me that you may be justified? Does anybody have any other translations other than... Go ahead, Ryan. You want to read yours?
I got an NIV in front of me.
Sure. What's it say?
Would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself?
Discredit's another word that's used. Does anybody else have the word break? I'm not sure what translation that was in. I couldn't find it anywhere. But this whole verse 8, will you annul or will you discredit or will you break my judgment? So what's God referring to here? He's talking about breaking his justice. What has Job done the entire first half of the book when he's talking to God? What's he doing to God? Complaining? He's essentially breaking his justice. He's saying, you judged me, you made me suffer without just cause. So the whole first half of Job is protesting to God, saying, you are breaking my justice. So God is answering him directly in verse 8, who are you to annul my judgment? Or who are you to break my justice or discredit my justice? Will you condemn me that you may be justified? So Job has denied that God is good and fair and just all through the first half of the book. So God is responding directly to Job in this second speech to him, trying to counter that justice directly to Job. Job, all through the first half of the book, kind of thought his suffering was punishment. And there was only two possible outcomes that Job had in his mind. So I want you to think back to Job. Everything's taken away from you. You've lost everything. What are the two possible outcomes you could have? So either I am a sinner deserving punishment. What's the challenge with that? Did Job sin? Did Job admit to any sin? I mean, his friends obviously thought he sinned. I mean, that's kind of the premise of the whole first half of the book is Job's friends thought, I'm a sinner deserving, he thought Job was a sinner deserving punishment, but Job clearly admits through the book that I wasn't a sinner, I didn't sin. Job knows that. So what's Job's only other possible conclusion? What? He's wrongly accused. God's cheating me. I'm perfectly in the right. Why is God doing this to me? So he's kind of almost at contention or odds with God because he thinks that I know I didn't do anything wrong. So either God has really mishandled my case, either God's kind of a dummy and doesn't realize that I am not a sinner, or God's really, really cruel and just torturing me because he wants to. So that's kind of what Job's logic, if you guys were in that same scenario, we'd probably have that same conclusion. If we did nothing wrong and we just got everything taken away from us or under immense suffering, wouldn't we kind of think the same thing? I mean, if we knew we hadn't sinned, we'd have to think that either A, God doesn't really know who I am and doesn't realize that I did nothing wrong, or B, God's just being really mean to me. So that's kind of what Job's thinking in this scenario. And that's kind of reflected in verse 8. So God's coming back to him, will you condemn me that you may be justified? So Job's trying to justify in his own mind that when he's speaking to God that, man, you're being really harsh on me with really undue cause. You're not being just at all. You're not being right at all. And God is trying to counter him right at the very first part of the second speech about that. God's just trying to give Job, in the second speech, just trying to help open his perspective about what's probably going on in Job's specific scenario. God's trying to point to Job that there are three things that can be possible at once. So obviously suffering can occur. Was Job suffering? Absolutely he was suffering. Was Job innocent? I mean, clearly Job was innocent. God even admits that Job was innocent. Job admits he was innocent. Was God still just? That's the point he was trying to get across to Job. All three of those things can occur at once. Job just couldn't see it. So God is trying to give Job a different perspective of how all three of those things can fit in unison, even though it didn't seem to Job that it couldn't happen. He's just trying to reveal that I'm not an enemy at you. I'm not trying to condemn you. I'm not trying to judge you. This is just part of part of the creation that it is, and he's just trying to show Job what that is. So we go to Job 38, verses 9 through 14. So this is before he kind of reveals more of his creation, more of his power and majesty. Let's read through that together. And we'll kind of go maybe verse by verse. 38:9, do you have an arm like God, and can you thunder with a voice like his? So if you remember, Job is a book of what? It fits with Psalms, Proverbs. They're kind of poetry books. A little bit hard for us to understand. I mean, I have a really hard time reading poetry and understanding poetry. Math is my thing, numbers my things, not words. So we have to remember this is a verse of poetry, and a lot of the references in Job refer to other references in the Old Testament. So let's look at where this arm is used other places in the New Testament. So this arm and thunder. So turn to Exodus 6, verse 6. We won't jump around this week near as much as we did the last two. So it says, say therefore to the sons of Israel, I am Yahweh, and I will bring you out from under the hard labors of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from their slavery. I will also redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. So there it talks about his outstretched arm, or the arm of God. And think about the context of where he's referring to that. Now let's turn to Exodus 16, verse 15. Just a few pages over. Maybe that's not the right reference. 15, 16, sorry, other way around. Apparently I'm not good with numbers either. Terror and dread fall upon them. By the greatness of your arm, they are still as stone, until your people pass over, O Yahweh, until the people pass over whom you have purchased. Got it? Outstretched arm. Once again, greatness of your arm. And then Isaiah 30, verses 30. And Yahweh will cause his splendid voice to be heard, and the descending of his arm to be seen in raging anger, and in the flame of a consuming fire, in cloudburst, downpour, and hailstones. For at the voice of Yahweh, Assyria will be dismayed. So in all these references about the arm and the thunder and the storms, what is God's position with Israel in all these cases? What's God doing for Israel? He's protecting them. He's on their side. His arm is the strength in going to battle against the Egyptians in Exodus, going to battle against the Assyrians. So if you remember last week, we talked about the whirlwind, correct? So again, when we open God's second speech, it talks about the whirlwind once again. And what was the whirlwind in reference to? The storm. Is God going to battle for his people? God's strength and his power going to battle and being on their side. And he's doing that same thing in Job 40, verse 9. He's talking about, I'm on your side, my arm and my thunder will be at your side. So there's kind of one of the first challenges to Job about God being his enemy of, no, I'm not your enemy. I'm your arm, I'm your thunder, I'm speaking through the whirlwind, I'm going to battle for you. I'm on your side, I'm not going against you. Those other Old Testament references are referring to the same thing, God being on the side of his people and going to battle for them. And then in verse 12, look on everyone who is proud and humble him, and tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together, bind their faces in the hidden place. What's God referring to there? Look on everyone who is proud and humble him. Does that sound like an unjust God? Sounds like the exact opposite to me. God is going to find the sinners and the evil ones, the proud, and he's going to humble them. So God is showing that I'm not an unjust God. I'm on your side. I'm going to find the wicked people, and I'm going to humble them. I'm going to tear them down. So it's God is showing to Job that it's not it's not the good people that are suffering under my judgment. God is punishing the wicked in the world. God is a just God. But is God's judgment just limited to the human realm? I mean, a lot of these we talked about, like the Assyrians.
No. He threw Satan out of heaven, and he will throw Satan in the abyss.
And I think that's what we're going to go to with Behemoth and Leviathan, which I'm really kind of nervous about because the book takes a completely different context than I've always thought about Behemoth and Leviathan, and probably a completely different context than everyone else has thought about. So we're going to see how this goes. And I may not be teaching next Sunday, and I may not be here next Sunday, depending on how this next 20 minutes shakes out. But we're going to try it anyways. So if you remember, if you think about Job as a poetry book, I mean, God is trying to really, really describe and show images to Job and help him picture. So what we're going to do is we're just going to read through Job. We're going to read through Behemoth really slow. And I just want you guys to picture in your brains what God is describing. We'll talk about these creatures probably in a little bit and maybe what they mean or what they don't mean. But just listen for what these things are. Listen to the descriptions that God uses of these creatures. So starting in verse 15. Behold now Behemoth, which I made along with you. It eats grass like an ox. Behold now its power is in its loins, and its vigor in the muscles of its belly. It hangs its tail like a cedar. The sinews of its thighs are knit together. The bones are tubes of bronze. Its limbs are like bars of iron. It is the first of the ways of God. Let its maker bring near its sword. Surely the mountains bring it food, and all the beasts of the fields play there. Under the lotus plants it lies down, in the hidden places of the reeds in the marsh. The lotus plants cover it with shade. The willows of the brook surround it. If a river oppresses, it is not alarmed. It is secure, though the Jordan bursts forth to its mouth. Can anyone capture it before its eyes? With snares can anyone pierce its nose? Again, I'm not a poetry person, but just the description here, you can imagine this creature hiding in the marsh, this big, powerful monster, as it were. Nothing can tame it. Nothing can capture it. So what do we get from the description of Behemoth? 16 through 18. Its power, it's in its loins. Its tail's like a cedar. Its bones are like bronze. Its limbs are like iron. I mean, he's talking about the strength of this animal. I mean, this thing has to be just really, really tough. Verse 20. The mountains bring it food, and all the beasts of the fields play there. It's stately. I mean, all other creation is kind of serving this other creature. It's secretive, 21 through 22. Under the lotus plants it lies down, in the hidden places of the reeds in the marsh. The lotus plants cover it with shade. I mean, it's kind of sneaking or hiding or secretive in the marsh. But at verse 23, if the river oppresses it, it's not alarmed. It is secure. I mean, it's steady. This animal is unmovable. It's unflinchable. It's unwavering. Can anyone capture before its eyes with snares? Can anyone pierce its nose? I mean, you can't control this thing either. So just keep those images in your mind. You're going to move on to Leviathan. We'll talk about these animals in a minute. Job's already aware of Leviathan, though. So, I mean, God is not bringing some new creature to him. So turn back to Job 3, verse 8. And I don't know if the KJV actually mentions the creature. I think it does. So this is when Job is talking about the cursing of the day of his birth. And in verse 8 it says, let those who curse it curse the day who are ready to rouse Leviathan. So Job obviously knows who Leviathan is already. I mean, I think most Old Testament people had an understanding of what Leviathan is, what this creature is. And Job is saying, whoever's going to curse my day, I want it to be the same people that can pull Leviathan out of the pit. So Job's already keenly aware of how powerful and mighty and evil this creature probably is. And the other neat fact, is this description of Leviathan is the longest physical description of any other thing in the Bible. I mean, there's a lot of verses dedicated to Leviathan. Job, I think, being aware of the animal and knowing about Leviathan, knows some things about it. So 41:1 and 2, can you draw Leviathan with a fishhook or press down its tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? I'm pretty sure Job knows that this animal can't be caught. What else can you not do? Verse 3 and 4, Will it make any supplications to you, or will he speak to you soft words? Will it cut a covenant with you? Will you take it for a slave forever? You can't cut a deal with this thing. 5 and 6. Will you play with it as with a bird? Will you bind it to your young women? Will the traders bargain over it? Will they divide it among the merchants? It can't be tamed either. I mean, it can't be domesticated. This is an animal that you just don't mess with. Verses 7 through 9. Can you fill its skin with harpoons or its head with fishing spears? Place your hand on it. Remember the battle. You will not do that again. So if you're going to fight this thing, you're only going to do it once, because you're not going to try and do this a second time. Then we get to some of the physical descriptions of Leviathan. Verse 14. Who can open the doors of its face? Around its teeth there is dreadful terror. So it's got terrible teeth. 15 through 17. Its strong scales are its pride, shut up as with a tight seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They cling one to another. They are interlocked and cannot be separated. So again, he's using, let's think about this visual imagery and try and picture this creature in our brains as God is describing this creature. 18 through 21. It sneezes, flash forth light, and its eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of its mouth go burning torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of its nostrils smoke goes forth as from a boiling pot and burning reeds. Its breath kindles coals, and a flame goes forth from its mouth. So we know it's fire-breathing. We know it has glowing eyes. Verse 22, in its neck lodges strength, and dismay leaps before it. There's terror in its neck. There's strength in its neck. 26 through 29, the sword that reaches it cannot avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. It regards iron as straw, bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make it flee. Sling stones are turned into stubble for it. Clubs are regarded as stubble. It laughs at the rattling of the javelin. There's not a single weapon that can touch this thing. And 31 through 32, it makes the depths boil like a pot. It makes the sea like a jar of ointment. Behind it, it makes a wake to shine. One would think the deep to be gray-haired. So when it moves through the water, it's churning up the water. It's boiling the water. Why does God go at such great lengths to describe this creature? What does it have to do with his justice? Look at 41 verse 10. We skipped over that. But I think that gives a little insight into why God is describing Leviathan the way he is. No one is so fierce that he dares to arouse it. Who then is he that can stand before me? So God is comparing his greatness to this great beast. So you think of this massive description of this animal that can't be tamed, can't be touched, all this terror in this. And what's God saying in verse 10? Who then is he that can stand before me? Does Leviathan stand a chance against God? So think about it from Job's perspective. So he's describing this animal. Does Job stand a chance before Leviathan? All that terror, all that might, all that power. Job's like, I can't do anything against this monster. And then God says right in verse 10, that monster stands no chance to me. So every verse kind of through this whole section of Leviathan, I think is to point Job to how superior he is than anything. Even Leviathan, the great terrible beast, how much superior he is. So then we're going to get to this. And this is where Sunday school might end early, depending on how this goes too. So are they real creatures? So we're gonna pretend we're all in Sunday school. We're all 5 and 6 year olds, and we're gonna give the good Sunday school answer for these. So what is behemoth? What have we always been taught? Dinosaurs. Hippopotamus is kind of the one that was standard to be used. What's the challenge with it? The tail. I don't know if you've ever seen that cute little hippo tail wagging through the water. It's a little different than what I imagine. Tail's not exactly like a cedar to me. So dinosaur could come to mind. So it's potential. I mean, there's merit with it being a real creature. But there's some descriptions with a hippo that don't match. So how about Leviathan? We've always been taught that that's a dragon, yes. the more Sunday school answer, because if we want to picture it as a real animal we see today, I've always been taught that it's a crocodile. I mean, because they can have steam coming out of their nose, they kind of wiggle through the water and churn the water. So that's the good Sunday school answer. Good job. We kind of figured those two out. But if that were the case, is that just two more displays of God's wisdom and power? I mean, obviously they are. I mean, it's showing God's created beings and how good he can be in his goodness, but it's also showing some disorder and some terror in what he's doing too, and how powerful and mighty he is. But if it's just two more of those, wouldn't Job just have the exact same reaction he did to the first speech?
The problem with the description is primitive humans kill both.
Perhaps these are creatures we've never seen.
I prefer not to, but
Correct. So, but back to, if they were just regular creatures, if they were just a hippo and a crocodile, like he's already described the lion and the mountain goat and everything, and I've heard it said too that they're just bigger, greater versions of creation, which obviously they were. I mean, they're bigger, more terrifying animals. But God's already revealed a lot of his creation to Job. So wouldn't Job just have the same reaction? Wouldn't those other creatures just be speech enough? So if we jump ahead to 42, I mean, Job's reaction to these two creatures and his reaction to God after God reveals these creatures is completely different than his reaction to the first speech. So there's, I think, something else going on besides just two bigger creatures, two better creatures. So if we go back to the Hebrew, behemoth is actually comes out of behema. So that's the Hebrew of behemoth, and behema is just beasts. So it's a plural of beasts. So could it mean just a bunch of beasts? Potentially. But behemoth is also, sometimes in the Hebrew they use plurals to define majesty. It's called the plural of majesty. So sometimes when they're defining things in the plural form, they're just translating things as bigger or more majestic or more of something. So it could also be translated as perhaps like a super beast, like the beast of all beasts. So is behemoth maybe a symbol of something else besides? Is he maybe just maybe he's a dinosaur, maybe he's a hippo, or is he just some type of symbol that God is trying to show to Job? How about Leviathan? So where else is Leviathan used in the Old Testament? So Job 3:8, we already read that. So Job is keenly aware of who Leviathan is. Isaiah 27 and verse 1 has a reference to Leviathan. In that day, Yahweh will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent, with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted serpent, and he will kill the dragon who lives in the sea. So there's talking about God defeating this creature. How about Psalm 74, verse 14? You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You gave him as food for the creatures of the desert. So God, once again, showing at some point in time, he's going to defeat this great beast described. Would it potentially be a little more confusing if it were interpreted as an actual animal? I don't know. Maybe God's just trying to describe something that these ancient Israelites had this keen awareness of. Maybe it was just a mythological creature that everyone was terrified by. Maybe it wasn't an actual creature. Maybe it was. I'm actually not going to answer that because I do want to teach next Sunday. But maybe God's just trying to show Job the greatness and power of this thing, and how he's going to, if you look at these other Old Testament references, how God has power and control over this, even in the supernatural realm. So let's think about that. Just pretend that behemoth is a hippo. Could behemoth be captured if it were a hippo? I mean, in theory, yes. I mean, there's actually, I think, some references to ancient Egyptians capturing hippos and having them tamed and domesticated. So if it were a hippo, we kind of rule that out because the ancient Egyptians could do it. Now we get to some fun stuff. Can you catch Leviathan with a hook? So if it were, let's pretend he were a crocodile. Anybody else watch the show Swamp People? that is the first thing that came to my mind when I read that verse. If it were a crocodile, swamp people wouldn't be a show. I mean, you wouldn't have a bunch of rednecks out trying to catch crocodiles because you couldn't do it. Well, obviously you can catch crocodiles with a hook because they do it all the time. I don't know why I kept having all these TV references come to me on this. What else was I going to... Let's go back. Let's go back a few slides. So it can't be caught. We can't make a deal. Can it be tamed? Can you tame a crocodile? Whoever here's been to an alligator farm? I mean, obviously they can be domesticated there. They can be captured there. You can train them to eat chicken off of a stick. I mean, yeah, you still wouldn't want to mess with them. Or if you see Leviathan or you fight Leviathan, it's something you never want to do again. Well, there's crocodile wrestlers out there, and they want to do it again. I mean, I wouldn't want to, but obviously it can be done. I mean, the description that God gives to Job of this Leviathan creature, I don't think is anything like what a crocodile is today. I mean, it's clearly on a whole nother scale than what he's referencing. It's one too many. So why did God reference a fierce battle only he could win if we're talking about this animal that you could actually fight? So 41 verses 8 and 9, he says, sorry, I'm not in Job anymore. Find that. (41) verses 8 and 9. Place your hand on it. Remember the battle. You will not do that again. Behold, his expectation is a lie. Will he be laid low even at the sight of it? 25 through 29. Even when it raises itself up, the mighty fear because of the crashing they are bewildered. The sword that reaches it cannot avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. It regards iron as straw, bronze as wood. I mean, all these references of this beast that you cannot potentially do battle with and survive. So I don't think it's an alligator. I don't think it's a hippo. But then we get another challenging part of maybe it is a created thing, maybe it isn't. I don't know. 40 verse 15 says, behold now behemoth, which I made along with you. So if it weren't a created thing, why would God say that? Well, the book gave a reference of behemoth being and Leviathan being these creatures almost subdued or tamed by other religious deities. So the Leviathan was actually this creature tamed by the Canaanites, supposedly, from what I read in the book. So it was almost like a Canaanite evil thing. So maybe God was just saying that to say, listen, there are no other gods. I'm the only God. Behold, behemoth, which I created. So he's kind of maybe just ruling out the idea that there's other gods or these other created beasts from these other religions that could potentially cause us grief. I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe he did actually create it. But regardless of whether these things are real, regardless of these things are imaginary, whether they're supernatural beings, whether they're actually created beings, I'll let you guys figure that out so I can, again, be up here next week. We can hash that out between Sunday school. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. I used to always think there were crocodiles and hippos. That's what I always taught. But then again, there's just too many references in there that say they're probably not. And then I kind of like the dragon reference myself. Maybe there were dragons back then and we just don't have them anymore. But if that's the case, where'd they go? Because it says right through Job that these things can't be tamed, they can't be killed, they can't be fought against. Maybe someone finally got a hold of one of these things. But it makes me wonder maybe just a little bit. I mean, God's opening my perspective of maybe he's revealing something different through the book of Job. But regardless, he's trying to point two things to Job. There is supernatural chaos in this world. So this beast, I mean, the Old Testament clearly has descriptions of this thing being way above anybody's realm. I mean, it's not just another creature. Leviathan is this mighty, magnificent, powerful, terrible, terrible being. So God obviously is showing Job that, listen, there are some things that are really hard to understand that I am allowing. They're terrible, they're chaotic. But they are there, and that's probably going to cause suffering and pain. I mean, he's showing that to Job through the description of Leviathan. I mean, something that terrible, that mighty, that powerful is clearly something you don't want to contend with, and if you do, it's going to cause problems. And God is showing Job, I'm allowing this. There are things like that exist in this world. But what else is he trying to show Job? That reference in 41:10. Yes, there's evil. Yes, there's terror. Yes, there's supernatural evil in this world, but what about it? I mean, you can't contend with Leviathan. You can't contend with Behemoth, but they can't contend with me. So if think about it as a level, you can't really think of it as a level, but here's Job down here on his puny level, and he can't come anywhere close to Leviathan and Behemoth. And then God is describing to Job, I am so much higher than those things are, nothing can contend with me. God is incomparable to Job. God is incomparable to creation. He's incomparable to animals. God is incomparable even to the sinister powers that rebel against him. So God is over everything. He's over creation. He's over Job. He's over the supernatural. God is in control. So what's Job take away from all this? Look at 40 verse 8. Remember that. Remember 40 verse 8? Will you annul my judgment? Will you condemn me that you may be justified? So can God still be just and still have suffering and terror in the world? I mean, God just showed Job Leviathan of, listen, I created this thing. There's going to be suffering. There's going to be terror. There's going to be evil. But it doesn't mean I'm unjust. Behemoth and Leviathan are showing God to Job from a completely different perspective of, I'm still in control, I create it, but there is evil and terror. But God doesn't specifically show Job, does God specifically tell Job the perspective he's supposed to have? He does it in a very, very unique way. He just reveals these great and powerful and mighty and terrible creatures and just lets Job interpret it for himself. Boy, sometimes we wish God would just tell us what he wants us to learn, correct? I don't think that's what he's doing here. He's giving Job a different perspective of who he is, but he's making Job figure it out himself. And if we go to Job 42, I mean, clearly Job has a different perspective after these two creatures are revealed. I mean, that becomes very obvious when Job's rebuttal to God's second speech. So what new conclusions does Job draw after seeing Behemoth and after seeing Leviathan? After God describes these great and powerful creatures, what changes in Job's mind? Why is his reaction different? I don't know. I guess we'll find out next week. If I'm here, we'll see. All right, let's close in a word of prayer, and then you guys can be dismissed. Dear Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for giving it to us all in different and unique ways. Thank you that each one of us can use it in different ways. Thank you for the different minds you've given us, how some of us understand poetry better, how some of us understand numbers better, but how your word is so powerful and so great and so true that it can speak to each one of us in different ways. Help us to learn like Job. Help us to have different perspectives about who you are and how you handle situations. Help us, as we go with those who are suffering, to maybe be a help to those and help them to think about you differently and why things might be occurring, Lord. Just continue to be with us this morning. Help us to thank you for a place where we can worship you freely. Help our hearts to be open. Help our minds to be open this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.